A great artist says, I can't teach you the proper way. I can only teach you what I'm experiencing, the metaphors that are deeply meaningful to me. And if it connects to you, if it lights your flame, then that's when we create a bonfire, metaphorically speaking.
Adam, do you get mad when people say
yes.
that? Okay.
Of course.
Okay.
No.
Adam, do you get mad when people say that story is just entertainment?
No, I don't think they're wrong. In fact, I think that's true, and I think it's that one word, just, that qualifier. It's just entertainment. You know, that implies that they don't have a lot of regard for what entertainment is, but entertainment is the single most important aspect of storytelling. Like entertainment, you know, I talk about this probably too much, but it comes, the etymological source of entertainment literally comes from entre tenere, which means to hold between, tenere, to hold, or to carry. And it literally comes from this idea of you're carrying the attention of the audience from moment to moment. And it is the single most difficult thing to do in any situation. To hold someone's attention is to connect with someone's mind. So that means like two physical beings that have separate bodies are connecting through some, usually arbitrated through art, which ultimately that's what story is. Story is art. And entertainment is the connection of those two minds. And it's an artist putting forth effort to say like, hey, I'm building a bridge, inviting the person to build their own half of the bridge and meeting them in the middle. So when you connect with somebody, when you're really connecting with somebody, you feel entertained. And it's the hardest thing to do. And for people to say, well, at least it was entertaining, it's like, to say it's entertaining is, I mean, perfect example is this movie, One Battle After Another. Did you guys see that yet?
No, I haven't seen it.
I don't want to do spoilers or anything, but it's one of Paul Thomas Anderson's, like, it feels like if Paul Anderson was doing a Marvel movie, where it's just fun, it's hopped up, it's hyper energy, it's beautiful cinematics, like it's beautifully shot, it's amazing performances, amazing acting. But what's interesting is that the characters are largely, you know, they're moral effigies, kind of just bobbling around each other. You don't see much transformation. There's a small transformation, which we can talk about. But what's interesting is that it's extremely entertaining. And of course, it's designed to be kind of like politically provocative, you know, and that's, you know, ultimately, if politics is all your art has to offer, you know, that has a shelf life of maybe like 10 minutes. But the really interesting stuff in there is, you know, the relationships, the kind of more human relationships. But what I think is interesting is that while it is very politically provocative and of its time, it's extremely entertaining, whether you agree with it or not, whether the politics appeal to you or not. It's a really, really entertaining story, and it's beautifully shot and beautifully edited in such a way that it's just dragging you through the story, whether you want to or not. You feel the stakes the whole time. And yet other people will, you know, they'll see the kind of political metaphors and they'll disengage. But if you open yourself up to the human experience of it, it's a fascinating, fun experience. It's super entertaining.
Is that similar in a sense to Crash? How there's different like sort of stereotypes bumping up against each other in a big city, and how each one holds its own grudge against the other, but really everyone's the same? You said it's sort of politically charged.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really seen that parallel before. I like that. Yeah. I mean, I do definitely I think that's one thing that like is, you know, part of Paul Anderson's like kind of mark is he takes characters and says, okay, we know what the stereotype is, and he introduces a stereotype. Now let's start stepping into their inner life, and then you start to see their values challenged. Right. I think in the case of One Battle After Another, their values aren't challenged at all, they're reinforced, but it's a fun ride regardless, you know? Sure. And that's you know, to be entertaining, I think is our first obligation as storytellers. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is a lot of stuff that is, you know, there's been so much denigration of entertainment that people are starting to lean heavily on like politics or even metaphor, but the metaphor is being pushed to the surface. And when you push metaphor to the surface, you disengage the narrative. So you stop believing these people are, you know, real, the characters are actually human, or have a soul or have some sort of agency, you start looking at them as, puppets or standees, effigies that you can just kind of collide around the billiard table. Once you start engaging the metaphor or the narrative, you disengage the drama. You stop asking like, what's going to happen? I'm really worried about this person. You start saying, oh, okay, this is a metaphor for this political ideology. And once they become that, it's like, okay, well, I hope they get what that political metaphor wants. But it just becomes an intellectual exercise. And then the entertainment dies. And so, no, I believe entertainment is sacred. I think it's the most important thing. I don't even care if anybody is even aware of metaphor or especially politics or allegories at all, or even moral themes. I only care that they're interested and fascinated by the characters and conflicts they put on screen or they put in their books. If they're fascinated by it, we're gonna feel it. But as soon as it turns into like this movie Eddington, did you see that one? Okay,
No.
So Eddington was this, came out just this year. It's Ari Aster. I'm a big fan of Ari Aster. I really liked Hereditary. I think it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I loved it.
With Eddington, I think he was doing something that was, it reminded me a lot of Asteroid City. Like both of them are metaphors for what is life like in a social media world, in a world that's arbitrated by media, by windows, we're all kind of trapped in these little surreal cities, these little trailer cities. And we're, what kind of meaningful relationships can we actually have when there's some sort of medium in between us? And I think Asteroid City actually did a more interesting job of kind of pushing the allegory below the surface. Eddington, I think the allegory is right on the surface, and that's ultimately what kind of turned the characters into effigies, into this is a metaphor for this ideology, and this is a metaphor for this ideology. And once you see that, then you stop seeing them as fully dimensional characters. And because of that, you watch Eddington, and ultimately you get a character you feel like the writer, Ari Aster, has contempt for all the characters he's writing, which makes me disengage. I start feeling like, well, if you just have contempt for them, why am I spending time here? Like, you're not putting in the effort to see these people as fully dimensional or valuable or have some sort of meaning or need. And once they're reduced to that kind of thin ideological dimension of just, they represent this, you sense that he just wants to be petty, that he's just punishing these characters. And believe me, as a writer, I'm like, you should absolutely punish the characters. Like, they should be going through conflict. They should be struggling the entire time, facing impossible odds. But at the core of it, we need to feel deeply that there's something there. We need to care deeply. That's what I would say is the main difference between like Eddington and One Battle After Another. One Battle After Another, clearly Paul Anderson loved DiCaprio's characters, like as the character that he played, and the daughter also. Like, he clearly had a deep love. It was clearly a certain amount of like projection of himself into the story, and that's why there was this sense of like, oh, you felt the stakes every scene. Whereas Eddington, you kind of felt like he just wanted to punish the main character for being wrong, and that ultimately feels like just a cornfield of straw men,
Well, maybe this is just going on a bit of a tangent here, but I'm curious,
Sure.
Even if the writer detests the character, isn't it the audience who determines whether the character is worthy? I mean, when you looked at the bull in the eyes, when you went hiking and you've loved this story of the Minotaur, you determined whether you thought it was a monster. And it seems like there was a part of you that was in awe that maybe you thought maybe it isn't a monster.
Yeah.
Maybe the audience defined it as that, or the writer of it, whoever sort of these myths, wherever they came from. So is it really that the character's a monster, or does the audience define it as such?
Okay, this is why I love talking to you, because it's like you blew up two different brilliant, interesting ideas. So first, the idea of the monster, right? Or is it, I saw this bull and I just felt this like in many ways, I think what I experienced like philosophers would describe as like the sublime, where it's this moment of like awe, of terror, combined with a moment of like fascination and respect and kind of sanctity. Like being in the presence of this bull that felt like it could tear me apart. I just, spent a whole day watching bull shred through people. And here I am with nobody in between me. No, I wasn't a spectator. I was engaging the bull directly. And it just dropped, like my stomach dropped. I felt like powerless against this massive, powerful bull with these huge horns. And looking in its eye, I didn't feel like it had this kind of threat to it, but I felt the presence of like something powerful. And I think that alone is where I think is the most interesting stories engage us, is this idea of the sublime, the idea that there is these forces of nature that we can't reconcile. In my series, Apocalypse Now Decoded, that's currently releasing on YouTube, we're going to talk a lot about that, about how much of Apocalypse Now is an attempt to engage the sublime in a really interesting way. So, putting that aside, the bull, I think it's, that's what I think great metaphors do, is they kind of embody something that we're still trying to kind of make sense of. We're still trying to negotiate our relationship with it. And as we negotiate a relationship with it, that's what, becomes fodder for more story. And we use stories to build beliefs, and we use these beliefs to navigate the world around us. Now, when it comes to the relationship with the audience, I'm very much a believer in, it sounds like patronizing to say, respecting the audience. But ultimately, the audience is the arbiter of their experience. That's why I say art is a bridge. As an artist, you get to build a bridge, but only the audience decides if they're going to meet you halfway across, if they're going to build. Some artists want to build a bridge all the way across and down the throat of their audience and just spoon feed everything. And ultimately, that's not a very satisfying experience. It might be like, okay, this is, fun, crazy spectacle, but it's not very meaningful because the audience that doesn't get to go on a journey. But I think the greatest artists tend to build their bridges halfway, invite them to meet you. Now, what the audience does with that is ultimately up to the audience. The worst thing an artist can do, this is a big reason why, most bad art comes from an artist who wants to change your mind. When they set out to say, I'm going to change the way you see the world. Ultimately, it's like, well, first of all, you don't know what their perspective of the world is. You're presenting something to an audience, whether the audience is one person or millions of people who are going to engage it, watch a movie or read a book. They're going to bring all of their experiences to it. They're going to speak to you through their window. And that is loaded. So the best you can do is just say, these are the metaphors that are deeply fascinating to me. And you're going to engage those metaphors sincerely and honestly and explore them. Treat them that's what I mean by honoring. You treat the metaphors not as allegory or metaphor. You treat them as real conflicts. And then the audience gets to engage them on the level that speaks to them. So I think the biggest mistake you can make when you set out to write something is, I'm going to change these people's mind about whatever subject. Because as soon as you sit down, you immediately sniff out that there's all sorts of straw men. You feel like you're in an intellectual argument with your audience. So then it becomes an intellectual exercise of, I'm trying to persuade and convince. I mean, don't get me wrong, story is one of the most important aspects of rhetoric. And rhetoric is, persuasion it's the art of persuasion. But when it comes to connecting with your audience, to try and start off by saying, hey, by the way, you have the wrong picture, I'm going to give you the right picture. It's the wrong step. It's the wrong thing to start a conversation. And because of that, I would say you're better off, plenty of writers do this. Unfortunately, we're inundated with writing right now that says, by the way, this is the correct way to see the world. And that ultimately becomes, it falls into the propaganda trap. That ultimately is what keeps people kind of trying to say, hey, I'm going to teach you the proper way to see the world. A great artist says, I can't teach you the proper way. I can only teach you what I'm experiencing, the metaphors that are deeply meaningful to me. And if it connects to you, if it lights your flame, then that's when we create a bonfire, metaphorically speaking.
Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.